So this event is called Privacy Papers for Policymakers. So my remarks tonight, hopefully, will be of interest to everyone, academia, industry, and policymakers. But really, they are aimed particularly at policymakers. That's my main intended audience tonight, policymakers and their staffers, because I believe that policymakers have a tremendously important and tremendously difficult job when it comes to privacy in our modern society. Although I'm an economist, and economists traditionally are believed to rely on free market and competitive solutions to any problem, I actually happen to believe that the role of policymakers in helping society find the right balance between data sharing, data protection is absolutely critical. And I will try to show you 4 examples of what I mean by this. The 4 examples come from the research I've been doing with others at Carnegie Mellon University. And as Chris was mentioning, my background is actually not in law, not in computer science, but in the social sciences. I'm an economist by training who moved into behavioral economics, and therefore I study privacy using a combination of economics and behavioral decision research. So the first study is a study driven by an economic question. To what extent US employers have started using social media in the hiring process, and to what extent the information they find on social media ends up affecting their behavior, their hiring behavior. Importantly, what we were trying to go after in this study, which is an experiment, and I'm about to describe it in a second, was the tension that we have between legislation which already exists and new technologies which are, in a way, challenging the legislation which already exists. The legislation which already exists, and I'm referring to, is the series of laws which prevent an employer in the United States from asking and using certain types of personal information in the hiring process. For instance, religious affiliation, or family status or family plans. That's at the federal level. At the state level, so in some states, yes, in some states, not, sex orientation. So the legislator decided, back in the days, that this information should not be used. It's not in the interest, overall interest of society for this information to be used. But in fact, now we have technologies which effectively are bypassing the regulation. Because many of us freely reveal information about ourselves online, including personal information, which pertains to our sexual orientation, our family status, our religious affiliation, which employers can find very easily, with very little cost and very little risk of detection. And this tension is an interesting tension to study, but it's a very difficult tension to resolve for policymakers. So what we did was the following. We, quote unquote, created fictional CVs, resumes, for fictional individuals, and we applied with these fictional resumes to over 4,000 jobs in the United States. Now, in the CVs, we only put professional information for these fictional but realistic-looking candidates. We didn't put any type of personal information pertaining to their sexual orientation or religious affiliation. However, if the employer who received the resumes decided to search online the names of the candidates they received, well, they would be bound to find the social media profiles which we also had created as part of the experiment. In fact, they will find the LinkedIn profiles, and on the LinkedIn profiles, they will find professional information matching what we had included in the resumes. But they will also find the Facebook profiles. In the Facebook profiles, we actually had added personal information pertaining, depending on the experimental conditions, to sexual orientation or religious affiliation of these fictional candidates. Now, if you believe in large sample sizes and good experimental randomization, you would expect that if employers are not searching online or not using the information they find online, therefore if the employers only rely on the CVs, because the CVs were identical, because these candidates were identical in terms of professional background and achievement and education, there shouldn't be any statistically significant difference in the callback ratio, meaning in the probability that the candidate will be called back for an interview. But in fact, if you detect a significant difference, that means that something's happening. That something is, some employers must be searching, must be finding information we left there, these Easter eggs, and must be reacting to it. And what we found was indeed that in the 4 experimental conditions we had, 1 male straight candidate, 1 male gay candidate, 1 male Christian candidate, 1 male Muslim candidate. What we found was that there was absolutely no statistically significant difference for the gay versus the straight candidate. They both had the same probability of being called for interview, about 10%, meaning out of 10 applications, 1 was called for an interview. For the Muslim Christian, not the same result. We found a difference. This difference was especially significant in the more conservative states. So in the more conservative states, the ratio between the probability of the Christian candidate being called back for interview and the Muslim candidate being called back for interview kept increasing, to the point that in some states there was a probability of 17% of the Christian candidate being called for interview, 4% of the Muslim candidate being called for interview. So this gives you a sense of how the sharing of information can play up your chances or can play down your chances depending on context. The second example or study I wanted to tell you about is how it is difficult for both policymakers to predict how information will be used, but also for the end users to realize how the information they reveal about themselves, innocuous, innocent-looking information, may actually end up being used. So in this study, we had this idea of downloading images coming from profiles of members of the Carnegie Mellon Facebook network. Many users on the network post photos of themselves, and they tag themselves. So you could call them identified photos. And in fact, over the last 10 years, there has been an explosion online of identified facial images. And over the last 10 years, there has been also an increase of almost 2 orders of magnitude in computers' ability to detect and identify faces in digital images. So what happens when you combine the 2 trends together? We wanted to address this question. So we ran a series of experiments. In one of them, we set up a booth on Carnegie Mellon campus, and we asked students who were walking by to sit in front of the booth, and if they agreed to participate in the study, we would take a shot of their face with a webcam, and we would then ask them to fill out a survey about their usage of social media with the laptop in front of them. In the meanwhile, we uploaded the webcam shot that we had just taken of them to the cloud. On the cloud, we had previously downloaded a few hundreds of thousands of images coming from Facebook profiles. And we also had installed on the cloud a computer face recognition software, PIT-PAT, and we started running comparison between the webcam shot of the person in front of us and the previously downloaded cloud images. By the time the subject reached the last page in the survey he or she was filling out on the laptop, well, that last page had been dynamically updated with the 10 best matching photos which we had found in the cloud. And the subject was asked to answer whether he or she found himself or herself in those images. And it so happened that 1 out of 3 of our subjects found themselves on the images, meaning that we had a hit rate of 33%, pretty much in real time. And then we didn't stop there, because a few years earlier, what we had done was to do another study, which was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Studies, in which we showed that we could take demographic data for people who are alive, again, for instance, from Facebook profiles, where people reveal date of birth and hometown. We could take also data coming from the Social Security Administration, specifically the Death Master File, or SSDI, Social Security Death Index, which is a database of Social Security numbers for people who are dead. And we could statistically recombine them in order to predict the Social Security numbers of people who are still alive. Okay, so we would recombine the SSN, or that people with the demographic data of people who are alive, and end up predicting the SSN of people who are alive. Now, if you take these 2 studies together and you kind of combine them in a chain of inferences, the research question becomes, can you start from a face, an anonymous face of someone in the street or someone online? Can you then use facial recognition and social media data to give a presumptive name to the person in front of you? Now that you have a presumptive name, can you find innocent, innocuous-looking public information about that person, such as their date of birth and hometown? And once you have that, can you infer something much more sensitive, such as their social security number? And the answer is yes. That's what we did in the final study, of course, as a proof of concept, meaning that the error rate was high, but we still did orders of magnitudes better than random chance. This is an example of a broader phenomenon which Paul Holm, Professor Paul Holm, at the time was still in Boulder, Colorado, called data accretion. The idea that data accrues across databases. And this is the fundamental lessons that we as individuals and you as policymakers have to deal with, that we may be revealing very innocent-looking information, but the combination of more data and more sophisticated techniques means that this information could become very, very sensitive very, very quickly. The third example is about what kind of policy interventions may not work. And then I will give an example of what kind of policy intervention may work. The kind of policy intervention which I believe doesn't work, at least doesn't work in isolation, has been the reliance on transparency and control mechanisms. I am a big believer in transparency, also a big believer in control, but this is a problem. Transparency and control are necessary, not sufficient conditions for privacy protection. Many, including many scholars in this room, have talked very eloquently and have completed important studies about the limitations of transparency tools, meaning privacy policies. We did something slightly different. We showed the limitations of control. In one specific experiment, we showed how we could give more control to people over their personal information. And the end result, paradoxically, was that people would take more risk with their personal data. So you give them more control, they start revealing more sensitive information to more strangers. Why? Well, the explanation probably is connected to overconfidence and is similar, or at least analogous, to something which had been studied already since the 70s. You may recall a study suggesting that when people are asked to wear a seatbelt, they may start driving faster. So there is some kind of risk reassessment which lead you to change your behavior and actually end up taking more risk. So something similar may be happening with privacy. You give more privacy settings, people start feeling more confident about their ability of protecting data, they end up actually taking more risk and disclosing even more. So what could instead work? Regulation sometimes has a bad rap in the US, but sometimes regulation is seen as an obstacle to innovation. Let me show you, and this is my fourth example, a scenario where it becomes evident that we should not really talk about privacy regulation in purely binary terms. So regulation, yes, no, good, bad. But rather it's the type of regulation and how exactly it is written and specified which can make a huge difference. So that bad regulation could actually indeed decrease innovation, but good regulation could actually improve innovation. So the study, which we published a few months ago in Management Science, was about HIEs, Health Information Exchanges. As you know, health information exchanges are a very exciting new development in healthcare, and they relate to electronic medical records. And clearly, there are significant privacy issues associated with HIEs. Now, across the United States, different states have taken very different regulatory approaches to HIEs. Not regulating them at all, or regulating them but actually creating incentives for the deployment of HIEs, or regulating them with some minor privacy provisions, or regulating them by creating both incentives and stronger privacy provisions, including specific requirement of patient consent, explicit consent to their data being included in use by HIEs. So we ran an econometric analysis using econometric tools to differentiate and causally link outcomes in terms of HIE's growth and probability of success, and the type of regulation each different state had enacted. What we found, surprisingly, was that states with regulation which only created incentives, but didn't actually take into consideration the privacy concerns of the subjects, didn't really have that much success in terms of growth and long-term survival HIEs, compared to the states which instead created the financial incentives, but also had stricter regulation requiring patient consent to the treatment with their data. So this is an example where actually regulation helped the innovation in HIEs. Why? We do not have the data to conclusively find out the exact mechanism. But one possibility is that the regulation we're talking about here reduces entrepreneurs' uncertainty about what may happen if they misuse the data. Once certain rules are specified requiring patient consent, and patient consent is obtained, in a way, this may unlock entrepreneurial ability to actually promote and progress with the HIEs. So these four examples, I hope, show how modern technologies are indeed creating new interesting challenges to privacy, but also how policymaking has really much to say about how we can turn these challenges into opportunities for growth. I believe that the privacy community, the privacy scholars community, and including especially the honorees tonight, the scholars who are the winner this evening, have done an enormously important work in showing the challenges and also some of the solutions. I also believe that policymakers have this opportunity of using these lessons coming from research for helping move us into a society where the benefits of consumer data, the benefits of big data, so to say, will be harnessed so as to benefit all of us. Thank you very much.